I'm Caryn Mirriam-Goldberg, and with me is
Great Yorke
and
Ruth Maus.
And we are going to do a panel called Ad Astra, Emergencies, Emergences, and Restorations. And I just embodied that first word by diving into the ground. I'm okay, but if I'm sitting like a big baby, this is what happens. So we are very much looking forward to sharing with you some of our writing and some of what this theme means to us. First of all, we don't have a mic, but can you hear us?
Yes.
If you can't hear us, you can pretend to be holding a remote control or do this, and we will try our best. Here we go, and we start with Ruth.
Good morning. Thank you all for coming. I'm honored to be here and part of the Kansas Book Festival. I'm going to read from my book. It's called Lunacy and Acts of God. It's the novel among two memoirs. It's a novel set in Topeka in the 1950s. You will recognize a lot of it if you're from Topeka, and I'm just going to start by reading a short piece. This is called The Psychiatric Capital of the World. My sister Harmony would later, in a rare moment of sympathy, try to console me. "You can't help the weather, Melody," she said. "Everybody knows that's acts of God. And you weren't responsible for the murder either. But mostly you couldn't help it because we live in the psychiatric capital of the world." She said this so matter-of-factly that I couldn't figure out if living in the psychiatric capital of the world was something good or bad. "Don't think about it too hard," she advised, "because I doubt if the Chamber of Commerce brags on this particular distinction." "You know what Dad says," she continued. "Our dad was an authority on lunatics, since he was around them every day at his Meadow Green clinic job. He says that between the state hospital, the VA hospital, and Meadow Green, every third person in this town is under psychiatric care, and another third needs to be." That didn't include us, of course. Well, at least not in the beginning. She explained that was what was wrong with all the people we saw walking around town conversing by themselves. I believe what she said was, "Once they start conversing by themselves, Melody, sooner or later they're going to end up in Topeka. Some get sent here against their will, but most of them are just drawn here because they fit right in." It was true. We considered it part of the landscape. At least Meadow Green mostly keeps their patients off the street, but I think the state hospital and the VA hold some kind of competition for the most day passes. Heck, those nuts are usually harmless, though occasionally somebody really unhinged goes off the deep end, and then it's too late, as you found out, Melody. Then you can't put the genie back in the bottle. When I looked confused at this, Harmony reverted to her normal condescending tone. "It's a figure of speech, dummy. They're not real genies. They're disturbed, emotionally unbalanced human beings with frequent unacceptable social behaviors and occasional breaks with reality." My sister talked funny like that because she herself suffered from intellectual, a brain disease that affected a person's speech and behavior. It's hard to say where she picked it up, and amazing we hadn't all caught it. But I heard Dewey tell Mother one time that Harmony sure was young to be so intellectual, so I knew she had it bad. It was a shame, too, since here we were living in the psychiatric capital of the world, and we couldn't even get Harmony's brain fixed. Harmony didn't walk around conversing by herself, so she wasn't crazy as far as we knew, just our weird older sister. The difference was important because I shared a room with her and had to be prepared in case she crossed the line. Mother told me not to worry about it too much, that there was a long way to go before the intellectual part became permanent. We had a lot of funny ideas about people back then.
Now Craig will read an excerpt from Steep.
Yeah, just a little context for a moment. Steep is a memoir of a black neurosurgeon, me, and it's less about bigotry than it is about success. What it cost and what it's been worth. It began life as a letter to our adult sons, and when I confronted a big stack of books at a big bookstore, books like, the 1619 Project, or Cast, or Between the World and Me, I found bulletproof thinking, I found irrefutable logic, just horrendous stuff, but it was all pretty much diagnostic. There wasn't much talk of remedy, and there was no shelf space for one guy from Topeka in the midst of these global forces. So I got to work. And this excerpt is, it won't surprise you that a neurosurgeon's memoir is crawling with emergencies. So this is one really that opens the book. It comes from the mid-1990s. I'm the senior neurosurgeon in Northeast Kansas at this point, and it's the early hours of a morning. I lifted the phone on its first ring and ordered the usual studies. It perched about 18 inches from my left ear and seldom brought good news after midnight. My new patient had run his motorcycle into a tree. He'd been unhelmeted and was now deeply unconscious. The ER told me the ambulance would reach them in about 15 minutes. I swung my legs left and stood. Neurosurgery was my day job, a practice humming with variety. I also covered Topeka's hospitals and the surrounding region every other night and every other weekend. These calls were not infrequent. My beeper, wallet, and keys were in their usual places, by the bathroom sink, my clothes draped on the door's hook. The drive to the ER took 5 minutes. No need to speed. The roads were empty. He and I arrived together. Unnumbered fragments of gravel, glass, and dirt were embedded in his face and arms. A cervical collar placed in the field protected his spinal cord. Bleeding from the scalp had slowed, but his blonde mane was matted with clot. He didn't move or resist the presence of the plastic tube in his windpipe. The smells were routine for that hour in that little brilliantly lit cubicle. Old alcohol, seasoned liberally with blood and vomit. A urine drug screen would reveal he'd made serious efforts to alter his mind. I moved toward the gurney as the nurse began shearing off his t-shirt. She stopped just short of his collar, recoiled, hissed, cussed. I glanced up to see the tattoo covering his chest. The block letters proclaimed, "White Power." So, this was an emergency, maybe in more ways than one.
My book, The Magic Eye, A Story of Saving a Life and a Place in the Age of Anxiety, is not a book where you have to wonder what the outcome is. It's about my story through a rare and deadly cancer. Spoiler, I'm here. And it's also about a 35-year struggle my husband Ken Lastman, ecological writer, that we were engaged in to save the land where we lived, which was in a very difficult family Gordian knot. And of course, a pandemic runs through it. And I'm going to read you part of the intro called How I Got Here. All I knew when I first walked this land was that Ken, my new boyfriend, had lost his brown wallet in the brown dirt. It was twilight, and Ken, his dad Gene, and I walked the horizontal ruts between the rows Ken had just plowed. Just when we were about to give up, I looked down toward something square and brown and found it, half buried in the soft dirt. I didn't know that September 1983 day how searching for treasure in the dirt would become a lifetime occupation. Close to 40 years later, I stepped barefoot onto the back deck of the house we built here. It's a cold April morning, the air just above freezing as I walk carefully to avoid some of the nails that weather has shimmied out of the wood planks. Like most days, I head to the western edge of the deck for a better view of the land we have spent all these years trying to save without knowing how much it was saving us. To the west, low-lying fog holds the prairie we replanted with reddened big bluestem and switchgrass fallen over, exhausted by freeze and thaw of early spring. If I cover my left eye, my right eye, damaged by cancer and radiation, sees a watercolor of dark green cedar rose dissolving into the pale blue of sky. Both eyes and the rest of me are continually learning to see where I live, impossibly fraught in a tangle of wounded ownership for decades that made it, like this body, vulnerable to invasion and destruction. What happened was both incremental and sudden, wave and particle, fate and liminal. Both this land and I are fortunate survivors against the odds. I've tunneled through cancer twice while living in and with a place. The land has made it through its own seemingly impossible story, despite so many beloved places just like it lost to bulldozers, generational trauma, and the lure of big dollars. Since the mid-'80s, Ken and I tried, argued, wrote, researched, reasoned, cried, talked, prayed, and planned to save the 130 acres his family had inhabited for over 150 years. If there were statistical analyses for survival rates for land like there often are for cancer, surely this land would have been given only a 1 or 2% chance of not being plowed and subdivided. Something I'm reminded of when I look all 4 directions. To the north, there's Lawrence, Kansas, with a consistently hot and bothered real estate market and businesses that can sell you vegan pad thai, a mermaid tattoo, a cow-shaped lamp, books on deep ecology and overcoming racism, or a latte with a perfectly drizzled sleeping cat on the foam. Yet Lawrence still has small-town touches, like the city band playing a medley from, obviously, The Wizard of Oz in South Park before an audience of oldsters in lawn chairs and tutu-bedecked 5-year-olds twirling in the grass. To the west, the emboldened blue sky frames the highway that we fought against to prevent the destruction of native prairies, tribal burial grounds, and historic ruts from the Santa Fe Trail. Working with a coalition of 4th and 5th generation farmers, free spirits, history buffs, native people fiercely protecting, yet again, hidden sacred sites, and people in love with tallgrass prairie, we won a half victory. The highway proceeded, but not on the path that would have destroyed much of what we sought to say. To the east, less than an hour's drive, there's Kansas City Metro with historic theaters boosting jazz singers or stand-up comics, the world-class Nelson Atkin Museum of Art, many manner of teams worth obsessing over, the Royals, the Chiefs, big box stores selling the usual stuff, and tiny shops pitching upcycled clothing or motorcycle detailing. For half of Ken's life, the lion's share of the farm belonged to his grandfather, Bill Wells. By the time I met Bill, he had mellowed, sort of. Ken and I, not a couple yet, stopped by his Topeka house on our way back to Lawrence. When I see that, he said, pointing to the Carter Mondale bumper sticker on my car, I want to get my shotgun and shoot it off. When I see that, I said, pointing to the Reagan bumper sticker on his front storm door, I want to get your shotgun and shoot it off. His face broke into a huge smile, showing me his missing and remaining teeth, And from then on, he accepted me as part of the pack because I didn't cower. I didn't know if I would see him again, but having been raised by a similar kind of man, I knew bullies only respected strength and humor didn't hurt, although I had no idea how to use a shotgun. Bill didn't buy that I wasn't Ken's girlfriend either. So we're going to start with this question, and Ruth, you could start. Our theme is emergencies, emergences, and restoration. How does your book relate to any or all of those words?
The protagonist in my book is the voice that you heard of Melody, who is a young girl, 9 years old, who is trying to figure out life. And the story, as the story unfolds, it's a coming-of-age story. There are some very shocking developments that completely devastate her, and she slowly tries to reconcile the jumble of all of these things in her normal life that up until that point has been harmonious and very prescribed and very safe in her world with the ideas that she's been raised with. And suddenly she's coming face to face with a lot of new ideas, new groups of people that she has not been exposed to. There's a lot of questioning that unfolds in the book. There is a murder, and ultimately there's a great deal of soul searching. So the restoration doesn't really come until the epilogue, and that's only like 2 pages long. So there's a lot of emerging as she grows and experiences events. Some of them are very funny, and some of them are very tragic. And she's trying to figure out how it all fits together. And I came across a quote yesterday that I really like and I think fits this theme of today. It's by, I think it won a Nobel Prize, James Baldwin. It says, "You think your pain and your heartbreak are unprecedented in the history of the world, but then you read." And I think that describes the books on this panel. There's pain. Everyone has pain. Everyone has to try to make sense of the world and all the events that unfold in our lives and the safety that we are hopefully raised in initially, but then life happens and oh my gosh, it can be pretty scary. That's what I think all of our books cover.
Thank you. Craig.
Well, like I said, there's plenty of emergencies in here. There's life and there's death. There's the existential ballet that happens in the operating room. Just a word about emergence, I'll try to paraphrase. There's a part in here about how my new wife, Mary, and I got to Topeka, and that dates from the summer of 1980. I had had a steep climb from a tough neighborhood in Boston through Harvard College and Harvard Medical School and world-class neurosurgical training. I was looking at jobs now at the end of that residency. And assistant professor at Emory, assistant professor at UCLA. I ran into a guy named Jack Runnels on a tennis court in Las Vegas at a big neurosurgical meeting. And it was a meeting where people look for jobs and look for candidates. And he said, you know, if you take those assistant professor jobs, you'll be superfluous for several years. I'm by myself in Northeast Kansas. I'm on call every night and every weekend. You come here and you'll be necessary. So we decided to make a road trip on a handshake, decided to make a road trip and join a practice here. You should know that at that time I had a temperamental, old German car. So we get in the car and we start from San Francisco. I hadn't realized that the cooling system of the car depended upon the city. So the air conditioner died halfway through Nevada, and 1980 set records for heat. We got to the border of Colorado, and it was like an endless frying pan. It was just unbelievable. We turned up the heater to the max to control the engine temperature. We had water. We were spraying each other. And in the back seat were Mary's personal friends, a bunch of houseplants. So we're spraying those. And I'm trying not to think about the few bottles of vintage Napa wine in the trunk that are quietly turning to toasty vinegar. Anyway, on the fourth day, we arrive at 6th and Fairlawn, the Holiday Inn, Topeka. It's just short of midnight. The temperature's 93. We get out of the car. I don't see any other German cars in that parking lot. This is one very, very foreign car. We approach the door of the hotel, and I see what look like birds, but they're actually insects that are circling the security lights. And so we cross our Rubicon. The date is June 30. And over the next several months, we emerge as a neurosurgeon, a teacher of neurology, new parents, homeowners, Kansans, and fledgling members of a real community. So that's an evidence of emergence.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I love the phrase existential ballet, and maybe that's true for many of us, whether or not we're well trained to be an elegant dancer in life. I'm thinking of the word emergencies because usually we hear that word as something very sudden, acute. And when I was told, to my great shock, it's eye cancer, ocular melanoma, something I didn't even know existed. You know, that was one of those huge shock moments. I called my husband, who was in Topeka and soon driving 80 miles an hour and more. Well, I guess everybody drives 80 miles an hour. 100 miles back to Lawrence and so on. But what we went through with the farm was a slow burn. Is it an emergency? Is it not an emergency? And I think about how this applies to many of us. There's these acute moments where someone we love, even ourselves, is facing mortal danger, or we lose somebody, or suddenly we're escorted to a very strange room at work and told to clean out our desk, or any number of things happen where, you know, the flashing lights go on and this is a huge emergency. And those moments, they can be totally impossible, but they often have a certain kind of tenderness. You know, walking around a hospital at 3 a.m. weeping, and then next thing you know, you're hugging the janitor. Or you're finding that a strange flavor of Doritos is something that really can get you through a very hard time. But there's also the slow burning, is it an emergency or is it not? And for 35 years, we tried to find a way to save the farm. We built a house there. We raised our 3 children, all in their 30s. They can say whether they're actually grown or not. And we made a life there without knowing if we would be surrounded by housing development, if this land that's my husband's lifeblood, you know, that he would say, I don't know if I can survive if we lose the farm, if this was to slip away from us. And my therapist used to say to me something like, you know, it's 9,020 days, whatever the numbers are, and you haven't lost the farm yet. You know, that you could, if you multiply, which I definitely did not do well just now. These are these types of things where you don't know the outcome of the story. I write songs with rhythm and blues singer Kelly Hunt, and we have a song called Miracle. And the chorus came to me while sitting on the gravel drive with my arm around the late great Shay, part chocolate lab, part Weimaraner. He could open the refrigerator, turn on the stove, anyway. The words of the chorus are, "A round rainbow is called a glory. What you survive in life is called a story. You never see the end of it until after the storm. To see the whole miracle, you've got to hold on. The working day miracle is where you belong." And this is the slow burn kind of emergency that so many of us, probably all of us, live. You have a child who has some issues or doesn't fit in or is facing very difficult mental or physical health situations, and you don't know what that story is. You're trying to make something happen in your community, at your work. You're living in the United States right now, and you don't know, is that circle going to turn around toward greater peace, justice, fairness? And it is excruciating at times to be in that slow burn of what feels like an emergency as you wait for an ending. And one thing that the story I wrote about really brings home to me is how holding on and recognizing that there's something much stronger than accepting no, which is to keep going on, is what can help get us through and help us find what brings us our next restoration. So with that, I'd like to go to the theme of restoration. I find that writing is a way of putting the pieces of myself back together. That word remembering, to take the parts of you and remember them, to integrate. Why don't we start with Craig? Did writing this book help you restore yourself or life or work in any way? Was it a practice of restoration in some ways for you?
The short answer is yes. I can't point to a single passage in here that speaks directly to restoration, but the work itself gave me a feeling of relief. I've not written a book before, but I had the advantage of having read good literature for a long time. I had the advantage of serious musical training. So I can say that I write with my ears, and I can say that every word in here has been spoken by me aloud many, many times. I was raised to be a weapon by my parents, a weapon against their racial humiliation. I was to be their knight in shining armor. And that history lived inside me. It controlled me unconsciously. And so the work of looking closely at those layers of armor, the work of looking closely at the past, has brought a kind of restoration, a little bit, has lightened me up a little bit, has kind of allowed myself to steep. I can't help quoting just a couple lines from a favorite poem of mine written by a guy from St. Louis. This is the use of memory for liberation, not less of love, but the expanding of love beyond desire. Fill in craving, envy, whatever. And so freedom, liberation from the past and the future also. So that's what I have to say about restoration.
Wonderful. And who wrote that?
Guy named Thomas Stearns Eliot.
Oh, I think we've heard of him.
A native of St. Louis.
T.S. Eliot, yeah.
American guy. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Ruth?
Did the writing of this book help restore myself or my life or my work in any ways? I wrote this book over 30 years ago. I wrote it by hand, longhand on notebook paper, And then first time it got typed was at the unemployment office because nobody had their own computer back in those days. So it was a long time coming. I can't tell you why I wrote it because it was so long ago, but I can tell you that time of my life was a period of uncertainty. I had several unexpected things happen that derailed my life in ways that were shocking and painful. And I was trying to recover from those, and I just sat down and wrote. And I did not know how the plot was going to unfold. I just wrote what wanted to be written. I can say that at that period of time that the book covers, the 1950s in Topeka, there was an extremely interesting convergence of a lot of historical events, not just the psychiatric capital of the world that was mentioned in Brown versus the Board of Education, which was huge, but we had an Air Force base here, Forbes, and we had a U-2 incident shot down in the Soviet Union that made big international headlines. We had a native Kansas president, Dwight Eisenhower. We have the Native American population in the Potawatomi Reservation, not very far from here. Of course, the state capitol and the legislature. And all of those things converged for a brief time in Topeka. And we had the Santa Fe Railroad, too, which was huge. And that's where I grew up around that period of time. So I was reflecting my own childhood in many ways, because it wasn't until many years later that I realized what an interesting convergence of major events had happened in this little town called Topeka. It was quite interesting. And there is a murder that really occurred in Topeka around that time, too. Well, actually, it occurred a few years later, but for literary purposes, I moved it into that time. What really was the restoration, not just getting it down and writing it and getting it typed on DOS, I might add, clear back then, and a floppy disk, but the restoring part came this year when Thea and Flint Hills Publishing and Nate and Sandy and all of her crew published my book after 30 years.
Here's to Thea.
Thank you. We're going to open it to questions in a moment, but I'll just say, for me, writing is always an act of restoration, and I'm sure I'd be a complete maniac if I didn't write, because it helps me put the pieces together and find something that's real. I read somewhere that writing is a way of being right in the time you're in. And of course, this is a book about seeing and seeing anew, notwithstanding falling into the ground because I wasn't looking this morning. But it's a reminder to keep opening our peripheral vision and also looking at what's right in front of me. So putting this together helped me to see my story and the land, and also the stories of others who live with impossible and slow burning things in a new light. So let's open it up in our last 10 minutes for questions you have. Yes.
Do any of you have times that stand out in your mind where you had to wrestle with blending fact and fiction, or vice versa, depending on your genre?
Well, I did, only because I didn't want to get sued. There's a group of picketing religious fanatics in this book, and we won't mention any names. So I changed some of the details in my story. There are, of course, psychiatric institutions here, and the murder that I mentioned. So I did take some liberties with modifying some people and some groups and some institutions, and yet kept the flavor, I think, of Topeka. My intention is never to make fun of anyone or ridicule anyone, but simply to portray what is, and then let the readers draw their own conclusions.
Thank you.
I tried to be true to the facts. I got great help from Nate Fredrickson to explode the chronology. It was a very boring book, moving from one year to the next to the next. And so I played with the chronology. And there are some parts here that are absolutely true psychologically, but may not be quite accurate, physically.
Mm-hmm. I know that feeling, and in memoir, we're kind of, and fiction too, we're aiming for truth that's more true than maybe facts would be. One thing that was tricky for me is writing about a lot of doctors. And I gave my book in advance, and I had very good experiences with doctors, which is to say, the few not so good experiences are not in the book. But I gave it to my doctors and said, is there anything that really bothers you? Do you want me to fictionalize you? And every single one said, no, keep it like it is. Some read it carefully. Some just said, whatever you want to do. But I have rules I've developed in writing memoirs. This is my 4th or 5th memoir, depending on how you count, where the people I write about, I show it to them in advance. And I say, is there anything you can't live with? And if so, we'll negotiate. And I particularly do this with my children and husband, and that has served me well. So, yes.
This is a quick question for each of you, because I'm sure there are a lot of people in the room who would love to read more of what you write. Are you working on anything new?
About a month ago, I was cleaning out some files and I came across the partial manuscript of a sequel, which I didn't even remember doing. So it was a long time ago, and I just set it aside and I thought, well, let me see how this one does. It picks up where this one leaves off, sort of. It's the same set of characters a few years later, but I have to say, since I couldn't even remember writing it, I was reading it fresh and it made me laugh. So I would say there's probably some potential there.
This was a heavy lift. Don't ask me about the cover. But when I sat down, I felt driven to write this. I felt like it was a story that really needed to be on that shelf at Barnes & Noble. As I sit here, I feel like I've had my say. I don't feel driven to say something more. That may change, but that's where things are for me now.
Always, I tend to work on 2 or 3 books at the same time. So if I get stuck in one, I can say, oh, you're not smart enough to figure this out, go to the other one. And I'm working especially on a new poetry collection called Back on Earth that's going to be published a year from January by Cornerstone Press. And I have till the end of the year to finalize what's in that, which I was told, feel free to move things around, add new stuff, but if you replace it with short stories, we'll have to talk. And I write blog posts and songs, and I feel like there's other essays or memoir type substances coming my way, but I can't see it yet. So we probably have time for one more question. Yes.
I have had the pleasure of hearing all 3 of you and reading various books, and I'm trying to summarize. I'm doing a lot more writing now, what you do. I see humor, I see painting sensory pictures using every sense, and I see a kaleidoscope that never stops turning.
What a beautiful comment, and that gives us a wonderful way to close, with the exception of each one of us sharing one thing we really appreciate about writing our book, about what we discovered in the way. Ruth?
Well, my book is ultimately about tolerance of others who may not be like you, and the journey to discovering that tolerance, and the fact that it was written so long ago but only got published now at the time when we need tolerance more than ever. I think there might be something cosmic in that, but I don't know.
If any of you have dealt with teenagers, this will resonate a little bit. I was in a spirited discussion with one of our sons, and I was warming up. I was about to raise my voice, and he got in my face and he said, "Dad, do not tell me what to do. Tell me what you did." So I shut up. But, you know, as I have begun to wake up, as I have begun to pay serious attention to the past, to my past, the world got richer and it got more interesting. So I've told this story, and you might consider telling yours. Might be a phone call, might be a letter, might be a song, might even be a book. I'll say that many voices today are clamoring at us. Tell us who we are, what we think, who we hate, what we want. But reclaiming your memory, especially the hard memories, can soften those voices and can give you a whiff of freedom. I am by no means liberated, but this work took me a step or two in the right direction.
Thank you. And my last comment is, I'm maybe partway through a very long book tour of many places, and I'm particularly finding deep connections with readers or listeners who have been through struggles to save land or have lost land and are working with the lifelong grief of that, as well as people who are living with serious illness. I've been facilitating workshops for people living with serious illness for 20-something years, and I continually learn so much from them. And so for me, I'm immensely grateful that what I write can have some part in helping others share their stories, and then everything Craig just said. So eloquently. So thank you so much. Thank you to Tom Averill for designing this panel and for the Kansas Book Festival for having us.